Now we can talk about, well, what are the possible ways of making that happen? What are the circumstances that have to exist for us to achieve that bigger picture goal? Now let's take my lived experience in actually leading this function, working in the function. Let's talk about what I'm afraid of, what they're afraid of, and then let's match that up to a process. Because when you realize for a change like that, there's a paradox. I believed the change had to happen. I didn't like how the procurement team was trying to make it happen. So accepting that that paradox can't exist is a really important mindset, and then you enter dialogue and conversation in a very different way.
Thank you so much for joining another edition of The Never Ending Climb for a Stronger Supply Chain and Procurement. Today, I have the pleasure of being joined by Sarah Robertson. Sarah is a passionate leader in corporate communications and change leadership. And Sarah, I am so glad to have you here with us because procurement involves so much change. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Sean. I'm excited to talk about this topic and hopefully help some people out there flip the script.
Well, I mean, I think this is the idea because there are so many people in procurement that feel like they are the guardians of the policy and they need to make things easier, or they're trying to make things feel seamless or invisible, or there's so many wonderful objectives like this. And yet every single one of those creates change. And I've always been a big believer in the idea that water is going to run downhill. And if you want to really make an effective change, you ideally create the conditions that the new way is just easier than the old way. It's call it change management through user experience. I
Right.
think this idea that there's supply chain and procurement leaders that are out there and they're leading change, not just projects or sourcing events.
Right.
What would you add to that?
You know, I can't imagine the pressure that procurement leaders are under. I mean, they're expected to disrupt the market disruption, manage risk, reduce costs, all of those things, global shoring, offshoring, all of those things. They're in their jobs because they're really, really good at process and process improvement and risk management and cost savings. But all of those things have to get done through people and by people. And so if you're not thinking about process plus people, you're really missing the mark, because you've got the critical skills in how to get the project done, but what you really need to build your muscle in is that critical skill in engaging and activating agency, individual and collective. How do you get people to do something differently than what they're doing right now? Failing to connect those two things is why projects fail. So we need to remember that action has to be done through people. Therefore, we need to think about how to enable those people to take that action.
Yeah, it's like it's the difference between Robert was one of the folks who joined us a while ago, and instead of his first step as a procurement or supply chain leader of building a policy, which some people say is the first thing you're supposed to do, the first thing he did is he put on some coveralls and went out on the night shift to go understand what the heck is holding people up.
Yeah.
And it's the people that ended up sharing with him some really, really important context that if you just went out there on high from the ivory tower and wrote a new policy and tried to push it out, you would have missed all of it and fundamentally would have missed the point. And that I
Yeah.
think those people are really where the rubber really hits the road.
Yeah, and I think what he was doing is creating connection, which is a foundation for trust, and trust is a foundation for making change happen.
Yeah, it
He could
sure
be the
is.
best, he could be the best policy writer on the planet, but if he hasn't gone out there and talked to people and built that foundation, no one's going to read his policy. So,
Yeah. And I think that the secret is a lot of policies are only really written and or read cover to cover by the person who wrote them. And
True.
now an increasingly large number of large language models,
Yes.
um, who hopefully can get you the right points without making something up. Yeah, I was thinking about change resistance and how there's this unfortunate association with change resistance of it getting a really bad rap. But if it's treated as friction instead of something bad, if it's treated as an opportunity for feedback, what do leaders get out of that by looking at it differently and by celebrating it as feedback?
Yeah, I mean, this is one of those flip the script moments. If you can see resistance as an asset, you're going to gather so much more information. Your solution is going to be more fit for purpose, right? Because you're going to talk to the people who are resisting. Um, and you're going to be engaging people in taking that action. So blaming resistance actually robs you of a very powerful asset. It's your superpower as a change leader. It's feedback, and like all feedback, it can help you with both design and implementation. And maybe like it's natural to say resistance is bad. Just follow this thread. 60 to 70% of change projects fail. That's a fact. Okay, if I know my change project is likely to fail or it has failed in the past, I gotta have someone to blame. Well, I'm not gonna blame me as the leader because it wasn't about me. My project plans were great, my policies were great. I gotta blame somebody. Oh, it was the people who resisted. So it is natural for resistance to be seen as an enemy, but management is the only place where that kind of friction is seen as a bad thing. If you look at like mechanics, biology, electronics, aerospace dynamics, resistance is just a function of operation, right? Space heaters don't work without resistance. Airplanes don't work without resistance. Auto racing, drag is just a thing you have to fix, right? Like in Ford
Yeah.
versus Ferrari when they taped all the strings to the car so they could see where the resistance was coming from. That,
Yeah.
that if you think about resistance as that kind of friction when you're leading through change, it's data, it's information, it's connection, and it's power.
It's something that we really need to celebrate. And I think the
Yeah.
idea with feedback, sometimes you're going to get feedback that, well, you need a bigger engine in there, or, well, we need to move those things out of the way. But at the end of the day, the words that ring for me with feedback like that is there's you got to understand it first, and then there's to an extent you're going to get all kinds of feedback, so you got to take what you like and leave the rest. And so the leaving the rest sometimes means that is not the problem anymore, but even
Right.
as you leave it, you need to understand what it was and where it was coming from so that you can still address it somehow, because leaving it unaddressed means that it is still there, it is still resistant, it is still friction. So you need to understand it and then address it in the right way. Because if you're going to add a spoiler or you're going to change the shape of the front of the car a little bit so that you don't have that drag right there, then that's where you unlock it, isn't it? So you've
Yeah.
got to understand it. Otherwise, you're ignoring it, and head in the sand like an ostrich does not create effective change.
No, ostrich is not the way to lead through change. Two things that came to mind for me is one, most often the people who are most outspoken about objections to the change are actually the people who are closest to the thing you're trying to change, have the most information about it, and they actually really care about you getting it right. Right? Yes, there's always people who are just going to resist for the sake of resisting. I'm not talking about those people. But you've got this middle like third who actually care about the company succeeding and therefore your project succeeding and therefore they're trying to help. So that I think that's one really important thing to keep in mind. Where you see resistance, walk into it, lean into it and understand what's behind it. Which brings me to my second point. Resistance can come from the head and or the heart. If you're leading a change, you created it with data. If you're receiving a change, you're receiving it with emotion. So we also need to understand it's not just logic and data that's behind resistance. There's emotion. There's probably fear of loss of control. So also just remembering you need to get things done through humans. Humans are complex beings. Humans are emotional beings. Oh, hold on. I need to create space for both of those conversations to happen, the data and the emotion.
And I think with the emotion, there's the light and the dark, right? And
Mm-hmm.
depending on the leader, they'll play more to the light or to the dark. And I know there are leaders who will
Yeah.
inspire and who will create that energy that pulls folks forward, works together. And then there are those that subscribe to this ancient drill sergeant concept like the ABCs of leadership for antithesis, behavior, and consequence. And the consequence is your ass is fired, and that leads from a place of fear, and it
Right.
creates a massively toxic environment. And I think that that contrast is so important, because it's not that there shouldn't be a sense of, man, we don't want to get fired. It's just that should not be the thing that keeps you coming to work and having your bag packed at all times, because that is a very unhealthy workplace. The way to lead change that creates a magnetic pull, like a lighter, energetic, like a positive draw towards a great outcome, I think those emotions are so much more powerful than fear, because people will work so much harder to help somebody else than they will
Yeah.
for themselves, or they will win so much better. And this is true in athletics, it's true in corporate performance, in just human behavior and physiology. The performance statistics for somebody playing from like a flow state will outstrip those of somebody in a fear state every single time.
Yeah.
And I think this is one of the things that there was a time for policies and for systems where there were leaders who would come down on high and say, you're going to use the new system because we pay
Yeah.
you. And if you don't like it, you can F off. And that kind of leadership, I don't know what kind of company that still
Yeah.
works, but man, they're in a bubble and it's going to pop soon. So it's scary, but it's still there, right? There's actually still companies that do that. And I know they probably don't follow this podcast, because I philosophically just am so far opposed to that sort of psychology. But what I'm thinking about is this way that resistance can help a procurement initiative succeed, a supply chain
Yeah.
initiative succeed. Can you talk us through some of those examples?
Yeah. I think I'm going to use myself as an example. Before I went out as an independent advisor, I spent 25 years in-house, big corporate, big companies, uh, worked with procurement teams a lot on a bunch of different projects. And don't hate me when I say this, I was guilty of being the resistor. Um, I
Resistor
was
to a procurement policy that you may not have known existed?
indeed. Um, what I was resisting was the tendency to focus completely on the process steps, the policy, the procurement metrics. I know that they exist and I know they're important. Where I had my best experience with a procurement team, and I didn't actually try to go around them, was when we had a conversation about, well, hold on a second. We've both been tasked with achieving something. It was outsourcing a department. Why have we been tasked with this? What's the bigger picture context around why this needs to be done? Why is it a risk? Why does it need to be managed now? Bigger picture for the company,
Right.
right?
But and how
And
often does that start? Like, start with why? Why does it
right.
matter? And you start from there, and so much of the rest of it is easier, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So, we started with, well, what do we have to achieve? Why does it matter? Why does it matter to all of these different people in our influence map? Why does it have to change now? Now we can talk about, well, what are the possible ways of making that happen? What are the circumstances that have to exist for us to achieve that bigger picture goal? Now let's take my lived experience in actually leading this function, working in the function. Let's talk about what I'm afraid of, what they're afraid of, and then let's match that up to a process. When you realize for a change like that, there's a paradox. I believed the change had to happen. I didn't like how the procurement team was trying to make it happen. So accepting that that paradox can't exist is a really important mindset. And then you enter dialogue and conversation in a very different way.
And I think this sense of it is an extremely hard thing to be tasked with helping to execute something that we would rather not do, or we
Yep.
don't like that needed to come to pass. But as leaders, we often need to do things that are hard. And, with my kids as an example, we climb mountains and go what some people would call extreme distances, running or hiking or biking or things like that. And those are hard things, but it
Yep.
builds this muscle of, well, this is just a hard thing, and I've done so many other hard things, so this will be not as hard. And every time you do that, it gets easier. The comfort
Yep.
zone, the ability to hold those two distinct ideas in your head of, I don't like this, but I know this needs to happen. And yet, here are some of the things that we also know for values of the company and things like that. They need to be true. So we have to honor these, even though we have to do these unfortunate things like outsourcing that are going to impact some
Yep.
jobs. There's a lot of organizations facing that right now with introduction of new technology that is now
Yeah.
automating things that previously was impossible that are now just hard.
Right. Right. And there is more than one way to manage that change, right?
Yes.
New
Yeah.
technology or process comes in, it affects people. Okay, does it have to affect people only in one way? Outsourcing? No. What are the other ways that you can affect that change? And if you
Yeah.
go in with that, I accept the paradox that I can support the idea behind the change, but I have some resistance to the change itself,
Yeah.
then you can dig into it. Because really, change resistance in general comes from one of three places: I don't get it, I don't like it, or I don't like you. All three of those can be addressed by a conversation.
Yeah. And I think that feels like where the digitization or the process improvement or the digital transformation starts to feel like it's the exciting thing. And yet it's got to
Right.
hit the road. And there's almost every project Gantt chart and program has the change management bar at the bottom. And everyone's like, oh, yes, change management. Yes, yes, yes. Good, good, good. Now, what does that mean? Ah, no, no, no. And when you come out the other side, you're thinking to yourself, well, you have
Yeah.
entered change territory. What are the signals that leaders need to watch for that they have changed that they need to be ready to communicate? And it sometimes can be communicated through, you used to do it this way, and now that way is gone and has been replaced by this. And it's kind of automatic, like the way some of the updates show up on our computers now or our phones. But sometimes it's something you really need to let people know about it.
Right. I think it's as simple as this. Anytime you are asking a person to think, feel, or do something differently than the status quo, you are in change territory. And if you're still not sure, then make a map. Say, I have this project. I have to achieve X. In achieving X, who needs to do what differently? And how big is that gap, right? My 30 years of experience tells me that you will find at least one group of people every time if you ask that question at the outset. By getting
Yep.
to X, who needs to do what differently?
Yeah. And I think about the number of times that people have hallucinated that throwing some better technology at it is going to automatically solve it, when the underlying clarity of what needs to happen or the right way for things to happen and how do some of the exceptions get handled, if that work hasn't been done, then it's very difficult to throw technology at something and have it fit, or to throw a new process or a new policy at something and have the positive outcome that we're looking for.
Well, I think that's because, Sean, technology, process, policy are all missing people.
People.
I was trying to come up with this. You know the saying, there's no I in team? I was trying to come up with this clever, there should be an I in the word change, because this whole concept around change has to be initiated and integrated by a human, one at a time, right? So you have to get to that individual level to get to the collective level to get to the organizational adoption. The policies and the processes don't do that individual and collective human integration thing. So I don't know. I'm going to work on this. There should be an
Yeah.
I in change.
One of the best ways that I've seen help is when you've done the work to understand who needs to change and what's hard for them today, understand the friction that they have today, and you can make the new thing, whatever that is, so much easier than whatever they had to do before. They
Yep.
run to it and water flows downhill. I find that to be like, that's what good looks like.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of a target can really help with companies that are struggling in procurement, supply chain, or elsewhere, struggling with adoption of new policies, new platforms, new processes, new people coming into the team, new
Yeah.
organizational structures, right? So what can leaders do early in their design or philosophy or kickoff for a new change initiative or a new program, a new project, or a new shift to help avoid that, well, we tried it, but nobody used it moment that could happen later unless you're deliberate and intentional about it.
Yeah. First is the map that we already talked about, and second is put the change into context. This works whether it's a system, a policy, a process, an org design, a new leader, whatever it is. Here's a formula that works to put things into context. Number one, talk about what is possible. What's the vision of the future state? Secondly, what's the gap to possible from now, where we are, to that future vision? Talk about why the current state is problematic. If people do not agree with you that the current state is problematic, they're never going to agree with you that the future state is good and important. So both of those pieces are important. So what's possible? What's the gap to possible? The third piece of creating context is why change? Why close the gap? Why do it now? So it's not enough just to say why. It's got to be this burning platform of why does that change have to happen right now? And the best way to communicate that with people is help them understand the risk of not. The risk of not for them, for the customer, for the company, for society at large, wherever it's relevant. So what's possible? What's the gap to possible? Why change and why change now? Next piece is tell me what my role is. Tell them what their role is in making the future state possible. Not go click this button and delete this app. Bigger picture. What is their role in making the future state possible? And finally, why do you believe they can?
And I think that why do I believe really comes back to that. What kind of energy do you lead with, right? If you lead with the because otherwise we fire you, that's very different from I believe in the future. And here's, we will go to the moon, not because dot, 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 right? Vastly different kind of place to come from. And the one that works long term, the one that sticks, the one that is sustainable is believing in the team and creating the conditions for them to succeed. I love this. I love that so much, Sarah. When you're thinking about the procurement and supply chain teams, and you've had the opportunity to work both inside and outside procurement, both as an internal customer of procurement
Yep.
and as a vendor that has to work through procurement, what's the one thing that you would hope those procurement and supply chain teams take away from this conversation to help with resistance to change, to help with adoption? What would that be?
I think it's flipping that script and realizing that resistance is your superpower. First of all, it's natural, right? The human brain is designed to keep us alive. Therefore, it is designed to sense danger. Change in the human brain is received as danger. So please accept that you're not going to change millions of years of biology or DNA or brain function or whatever it is. Change is seen as danger. Accept that and then lean into it and dig into it. Leaning into that resistance is your superpower. I mean, you've got, you can divide any audience into thirds, right? Generally. 33% is going to say, yay me, I'm in. Whatever the change is, I'm in. What was it? Who cares? I'm in, right? We're not talking about those people. You've got 33% of people who are going to say, no way, no how, I hate change, I don't care what you do. And then you've got this middle 33% who are like, maybe, I don't know, say more about that. Like, those are the, and you're probably going to get the most meaningful and useful resistance from that group because they care about it. They want it to work. They want it to succeed. They've got ideas. So
So important to
recognize
listen
that,
to them.
yeah,
Like
you
seek
go,
them out, right?
yeah, go looking for them. Importantly, take the time to validate how they feel, right? Don't say, I know change is hard, and then carry on. Go to them and say, what do you think about this? What questions do you have? How do you feel about it? Yes, we have to talk about feelings in the workplace because we receive change with emotion. And then validate it. Say, yeah, I get that. I can see why you feel that way. Secondly, is normalize it, right? To your point, everything's scary the first time you do it. It's normal for this to maybe cause some fear. It's maybe we've gone through an unpleasant change in our organization in the past. Acknowledge that. Also, talk about the frequency with which you do and succeed at hard things in your organization and in life, right? So you validated it, you normalized it, and then go back to give them that reason to believe. Put it in context, give them some hope, have them brainstorm how it can succeed, what conditions need to be in place for
Bring
them.
them hope.
Yeah,
Everybody, I think, could use a little more hope in their lives, Sarah.
absolutely.
What is the best way for somebody that's looking for help with change, with communication, to get in touch with you, Sarah?
Best way is email me directly. I'm Sarah at prospectstrategies.ca. I'm easy to find on LinkedIn, Sarah L. Manley Robertson. I've got a little maple leaf next to my name, so those two ways are the best and fastest way to get a hold of me. And please do, please do. I like to collect people. Happy to have introductory chats with people because that's how I learn and keep my perspective as well. So bring it on.
Sarah, that's amazing. And I hope folks out there can reach out because there is always change happening in supply chain. And thank you very, very much, Sarah, for joining us. And thank you to everybody out there for joining another edition of The Never Ending Climb for Stronger Supply Chain and Procurement. See you next week.